Kraken Con. How many people have been to Kraken Con in the past? Excellent. My experience with Kraken Con, I was at the very first one in South San Francisco. And it was great. And when they asked me back, I couldn't say no, especially living in San Jose, just so close, right? Right. And so I'm sorry, my throat, but they're getting me water, so. But coming to the first panel, that's great, because that tells me that you're not just rushing to the floor to buy all these cute stuffed animals. You're kind of coming to the panels, and you're kind of taking it slow and easy, and hopefully we can, discuss, my love of writing and fantasy novels. For those who haven't heard of me, my name is Davidson L. Haworth, fantasy author. Basically, it's historical fantasy. So it's, in all my books, all the locations are real, except for the characters. Some of the characters I'll use like historical characters, so it interweaves. So when you're reading, like the series I have out now, The Defenders of Prowley, it takes place in the Middle Ages during the Crusades. So I use some historical characters mingled in with my fictional fantasy characters, and you read it and go, maybe that could have happened. You just don't know. And right now I'm writing a book of short stories. I was doing a tour in Russia and Ukraine last couple of years, and they have a great love for short stories. Like authors like Pushkin and a lot of their famous writers, they're an expert in short stories. So I read a lot of them and I said, you know what, this is fascinating. Oh, come on in.
Sorry, you want to just
okay.
run in front. Here's this and a few extras. We'll just
Great.
Cool.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So I thought to myself, I did a trilogy for 5 years. And when you're writing, you're basically trapped in that world for 5 years, And there are times when you're writing that you just want to stop and write something else, And that's what's so great about the short story, because it can give you a break, from the main stories that you're writing. So I decided in 2016 I would just release a book of just a lot of short stories. I met a fan of mine in England, in a small town, Felixstowe. It's about an hour and a half north east of London. And I was shocked because, never writing short stories before, I didn't know how people were going to take it, especially, Western culture, because mostly it's an Eastern, Europe thing, the short stories. I mean, even though we do write short stories, most people, well, when I began writing professionally out of college, for D&D and other things, we write the big, thick books, fantasy books. So when I was in England, an elderly man, he came up to me and said, I read some of your short stories, and it reminded me as a kid, reading Somerset Maugham. And I don't know if you know who Somerset Maugham is, but I was shocked. I said, wow, really? If that's the case, I'm going to continue to write my short stories, because it's one of the biggest compliments you can get as a writer. So that'll be out in 2016, and I'm really enjoying that because I'm writing the short story, and then I can go on to another story or other ideas, because as a writer, you have so many ideas in your head. There is no way you're going to be able to get all your ideas written before you die. I mean, there's no way. You got just so much going on. But writing the short story, it gives me, the chance to delve in some different things, and one of them is science fiction. Oblivion with Tom Cruise, that was one of my favorite movies. To me, it was one of the best sci-fi films I had seen in a long time. And people are like, really? And I said, yeah, I really enjoyed it. I thought it was well written. Everything about it. I'm not a big fan of Tom Cruise, but when I'm watching a movie, I don't care about someone's personal life. I care about what they're bringing me on the screen. And what he brought is, when I'm watching the movie, sometimes you'll watch a movie and you'd be like, oh, it's Tom Cruise in a movie and I'm just watching this movie. He did such a great job. I forgot he was Tom Cruise. You know, he did such a good, I thought he was the character on the screen, you know. And because of that movie, I said, well, I want to do some science fiction stuff, just not fantasy. So in this book of short stories, I'm doing some sci-fi, so which gives me the opportunity to do that. So so let's get into the topic of of the panel. You know, writing. How many people have written anything at all? Books, anything? Yeah. Has anyone been published or yeah? Okay. I started writing very early, you know, before computers really. It was pencil to paper, you know. I first started when I was 6, and I actually wrote a complete play, stage play, in 1st grade, and I was horrible in school. I was just clowning around. And the teacher says, and I asked the teacher, hey, I wrote this play, I want my friends and I want to perform it in an assembly on stage. And they're like, no way, your grades are complete rubbish. No way, get your grades up and you can do it. And you know, the mindset there is, he'll never get his grades up. This is never gonna happen. It's not gonna come to fruition. So, forget about it. Well, I ended up getting my grades up. And so my first written piece was performed by my friends and I in an assembly at my school. And it was kind of tacky because it was almost like it was a take, almost a rewrite of Airport 1975 with Charlton Heston. And we had a bunch of seats. We had like 4 seats and 4 rows and 2 seats up front. And 2 of the kids would be playing the pilot and the co-pilot, and we'd have some passengers. It was just, you know, it was just hilarious. So that's, you know, my first experience with writing. And I wrote almost every day of my life. You have to write every single day, even if it's just a sentence, you know. And then right out of college, I started writing, you know, TSR, Dungeons and Dragons, creature descriptions. And then I went to movie scripts and did some commercials, and then back to fantasy, my first love. But when you're writing a book, like I was in Long Beach last week, we were talking about you know, how to get a storyline together. And for me, I have just a simple idea in my head, and maybe some ideas about some of the characters. And what I do is I write a biography for every single character, you know, right down to their complexion, you know, the hair color, what they're wearing, the color of their socks, the name of their parents, and then I'll write a biography for the character's parents, even if they're considered dead, you know, in the book. And even if they're just mentioned a couple of times, I do a full biography. And once you start getting these biographies of your characters, the story begins to almost write itself. And what also helps you, for example, in my story I have an archer girl. I know that's not too original, having an archer girl. And my, you know, I didn't take it from Hunger Games. I basically, you know, because I'm a C.S. Lewis is almost a homage to him in Chronicles of Narnia. And the other author that influenced me was Tolkien, so a lot of my material is very Tolkien-esque, very C.S. Lewis. But you're writing in the biography and you say, oh, she has a red belt. So, you know, you're just writing about this character in chapter 1. So here you are at chapter 11, and you start writing, oh, and she has a green belt. And there's something, wait a minute, am I right? I don't know. If you didn't have your biography of the character, you would have to go all the way back, probably read the entire first chapter again, just to find out what color the belt is. And that's just a lot of waste of time. So the biographies, if you're like, okay, what belt boom, pick up the biography, it's just written right there. You know, it just makes things smoother, so to speak. And in regards to writing, you know, it's interesting. I have a rule. I never critique, I never question, I never give any negative feedback or what they call constructive criticism to any writer, right? Because writers get enough criticism, you know. And I go to conventions a lot, and I meet a lot of writers. And I love exchanging books with other writers. I like reading, you know, what they have. And a lot of this is not maybe my taste, but you have to respect it. You have to respect anyone who's willing to write something and put it out there. So my books, I usually go from chapter 1 to chapter 12. A lot of writers, even though I say don't criticize, I don't. A lot of times you'll see like a 400-page book, but you'll have like 34 chapters, you know, just, and old school, usually a basic book is chapter 1 to chapter 12, you know. And in chapter 1, you usually, it's usually you're explaining, you know, your main characters. This is kind of the intro to the main character. And I know there's a lot of writers out there, especially ones who write like thrillers and mysteries. What they'll do is, a lot of them are influenced by the James Bond movies, but not the Ian Fleming books. So what'll happen is I have a whole chapter with all this action and all this stuff happening, and then second chapter will be like a chapter 1. You see what I mean? So I kind of reverse it. And I've never asked one of them, why do you do that? But most of them, when I say, oh, I'm a big Bond fan, you know, I like all the movies too, but you know. And if you notice in the Bond films, they always have like a 10-minute, totally awesome action sequence with some mega stunt. And then they have the credits, and then it goes into James Bond walking into the office to get his next mission. That's good for Bond, and Ian Fleming, excuse me, didn't even do that in his books. You know, but people, they'll take the cinematic and then they'll write it that way. So the first chapter is, you know, usually always about the main character. And then I don't actually get to the villain until the third chapter. You know, and actually a lot of times is I introduce like the henchman, you know. And there's always some kind of henchman. Like in Lord of the Rings, I consider Gollum kind of like a henchman, you know, and he's the one that that usually connects the hero with the evildoer, the antagonist, what have you. He's kind of like that go-between between the two, and it kind of helps to bring it together. A lot of times the main villain will use his henchmen to go out and disrupt something, you know, that ends up getting the hero in trouble. The henchman is a great tool to use to get your heroes into some kind of bind, you know. So usually the first couple of chapters is introductions, and by fourth chapter, you know, you have a conflict. The hero has some conflict which throws him into having, you know, for example, my first book, the dragon destroys the entire village, you know, picking up damsels in distress and eating them whole and this and that. And my dragon, when you're writing, it's very difficult at times to think of creatures or villains or characters that are completely original. You know what I mean? It's very hard. So for my Prowley series, what I did was, the hero was actually a Franciscan monk in a monastery who was completely hapless. All he would do is clean brass and mop floors and be told what to do, and kind of like the housemaid to the other monks. And I thought, well, I'm going to turn this guy into a hapless monk, and by the end of the series, he's going to be this warrior, you know. But sometimes, you know, when you're writing, sometimes the characters take over the story, and sometimes the characters don't turn out what you thought they would be to begin with. They almost take a life of their own when you're writing. For example, in the book, the Archer girl, 15-year-old girl, Mary, she was just supposed to be, you know, following the orders of the monk through this quest, and they tag along with this knight. But by the end of book 3, she's the ultimate hero. She was the one, you know, and I didn't even turn it out to be that way. I wanted the monk to be the one, but it didn't end up that way. She ended up being the main hero, and sometimes it ends up that way. The characters just take a life of their own, you know. And now, because a lot of people come to me and says, you know what, I really enjoy the Archer character. And, you know, I don't know what it is. Maybe someone can answer this. What is it with Archer girls? You know? Girls in archery. You know? For some reason, it's just a perfect match, right? And it just, you know, from Katniss to, what's her name? In the C.S. Lewis and the movie Brave and all that weapon just matches, I guess. So so in 2018 she's going to have a series coming out. So she's going to have a whole entire spin-off to herself that takes place after the Prowley series. Nowadays, when people are writing books, not everybody. I'm speaking in generalities here, you know, but that's okay. You know, like with Harry Potter, you know, when I worked for D&D, it was like, you know, you have lawful good, chaotic good, lawful evil. You know, you have all these categories. With Tolkien, it was good versus evil, and, you know, that's it. And then, but nowadays, in regards to authors like J.K. Rowling, for example, in my opinion anyway, everything seems to be gray. You know, like there is no 100% good and evil, even though Voldemort is a hell of an evil character. But even the good guys, they seem more chaotic good. They're not lawful good. They're not, I mean, you can sense that there could be some evil within them. You know, they could be, there could be some possibilities of evil within them. And I understand that because human nature, let's face it, the human race, we're built for self-destruction. We're built for anarchy and destroying ourselves and destroying others around us, you know. Just look out in the world today, you know. A few years ago, look at what happened at the genocide in Rwanda. One tribe was killing another just because the nose looked different. It's like, are you kidding me? You know. So I understand when she was writing that, you know, she wanted just a little bit more in-depth characters besides just good and evil. But I think it's society. It tells something about society as well, that we don't look at people as good and evil anymore. There's just this gray. And I wanted to get back to the traditional fantasy of good and evil. And a lot of people, I don't know, I want to kind of bring that back, and I did that within my story, like the wizard. You know, that was kind of like my answer to Harry Potter. My wizard is completely evil. My vampires are completely evil. They're, you know, more like Christopher Lee, you know, if you ever watch the old Hammer films. The kind of vampire that'll sneak through a window and steal an infant and suck the blood of the, you know what I mean? Stuff you don't see, like in Twilight. And the third book was kind of like my answer to Twilight, because I'm looking at all these characters that are being released, and, you know, like Harry Potter is a lot of gray. Twilight, the vampires are walking out in the sun, you know, stripping off their shirts, all, you know, all this kind of stuff. I wanted to bring back the real Nosferatus, the real evil. For me, like Tolkien, if you have good and evil and no gray, for me, the evil is seen more so. You know what I mean? It's more emphasized. You know, there's more of an urgency for your characters to defeat this evil. You know, and they say in writing there's only really 7 story plots, you know? But what's so great about the human mind is that it's just a giant computer. I mean, look out on the floor with all these people with all their great ideas, you know, on their tables. You know, I mean, people do come up with, like, say you come up with an idea for a book, and you're looking around, oh, someone already came up with that idea. But you know what, within 5-10 minutes, you already have another original idea. The mind is just an amazing tool, specifically, you know, for writing. So yeah, when you're writing your book, you know, by chapter 4, you want to have that, you know, that conflict. For those who've written, what do you find today to be boring in like fantasy genre? I mean, first of all, does everyone read fantasy or even watch fantasy movies? I mean, what do you find more interesting? Do you still find the quest, you know, where friends get together and they travel long distances and they have many experiences between point A and point B, or do you prefer something a little bit more? Or do you still like the quest type of stuff?
Definitely like the quest.
Right.
I mean, the whole point of most books is from point A to point B. It's not just the destination, but how you got there.
Right, exactly. And for me, the first book of my series is a total quest, right? Because for me, the quest is easier to write. It really is. To just, you know, like Lord of the Rings, they're long distances, they have to travel a long way. And you think, wow, that's going to be a long way for them to walk. But I can throw so much stuff in front of their face as I'm writing to fill this book that I'm writing. I need to fill it, so the quest is perfect. You know, for the second book, it was more of, well, the third book actually, it was more of, I wanted to do something like a mystery. You know, and I go, how am I going to put kind of a mystery element in a fantasy book? And a lot of times you have to go to other source material. For example, for that I went to a show and books as well, British books called Cadfile. Have you ever heard of that? And Derek Jacobi played, I forget the name of the character, the main character. And he was in, if you know Doctor Who, which I'll be talking about tomorrow,